This programme has been told that the rollout of universal credit is leaving people near destitute due to flaws in its design. Intended to make claiming benefits more simple, the knock-on effect of a 6-week delay before receiving the first payment has led to huge problems for some. This morning, one parent tells us her child was forced to search for food in bins, and another dad says he didn't eat for 3 days as they waited for their benefit to be paid. The government's rejected calls to pause the introduction of universal credit, which is the biggest change to the benefit system since the 1940s. Labour had called on the Prime Minister to halt the rollout until problems with the system had been fixed. Conservative MPs were under orders to boycott a vote on the issue last night, meaning the government lost by 299 votes to none. It wasn't a binding vote, so ministers can ignore the outcome. Our reporter John Owen has more.
I've never struggled like this before in my life. I've never been in this situation where I could lose my home. And it's quite, it's a big thing. I'll die on them streets. If I do get evicted, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know where to go for help.
On a Saturday, we were walking down the street and she was searching in bins for food because she was starving. She was like ripping McDonald's bags to see if there was any chips or anything on the floor. It was awful, broke my heart.
The government's flagship benefit reform, universal credit, has been under fire due to the length of time new claimants have been forced to wait for their first payment. Yesterday, the government suffered a symbolic defeat in Parliament as opposition MPs voted in favour of pausing the rollout of the new system. Although the result isn't ultimately binding, it's further evidence of mounting pressure on the government to change course. The introduction of universal credit in 2013 was billed as a radical simplification of the welfare system. Consolidating 6 benefits into one, it came with the promise that it would always pay to be in work because a claimant's income from universal credit would be reduced gradually as they earned more. In recent weeks, a dramatic expansion of the new system has been taking place, with claimants at around 50 job centres per month due to move on to universal credit. Eventually, around 7 million households will be receiving universal credit payments. But as the rollout gathers pace, this programme has heard stories of claimants being left for long periods without any income at all, resulting in threats of eviction, hunger and increased use of food banks. In theory, claimants should expect to wait around 5 to 6 weeks for their first payment. That includes a 7-day period in which new claimants are usually not entitled to any money at all, plus a 1 calendar month assessment period. But in reality, many new claimants are being forced to wait much longer. Anna was moved on to universal credit from other benefits a few weeks ago, and she says that for her, the impact was devastating.
They said you have to apply for universal credit, but you have to do it online. So they made me do it online, and I applied for it. It said all the benefits are going to stop. Child benefit, child tax credit, income support, council tax, housing benefits, all going to stop until you get your next payment. And they've turned around and said I have to wait between 6 weeks and 3 months before I get a payment.
And so for the last 2.5 weeks you haven't had any money in at all?
Nothing whatsoever.
And how have things been for you in that time? Very,
very difficult. Last weekend, we've had no food. My 5-year-old's last food was school dinners. On a Saturday, we were walking down the street and she was searching in bins for food because she was starving. She was like ripping McDonald's bags to see if there was any chips or anything on the floor. It was awful, broke my heart. Sunday there was no food. She was going to bed. Her stomach was rumbling. I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. And she had no food Saturday, Sunday, went to school really, really hungry. You take her to bed and her tummy's rumbling and you're just giving her water, but she wants food and you can't. I can't go to the shop and steal. It's awful. I can't keep asking neighbours for food because I shouldn't have to live like this. That's awful. I had to go to a food bank to get some food. Without that, I would still be without food now. I don't know if I'm going to still have my house because I need to pay my rent. Council tax is due. I don't know. It's my worst nightmare. What do I do next? Do I beg on the street to get some milk and bread? I don't want to do that either. But it might come to the stage where I have to.
Anna is looking for work, but having been out of the job market for a long time whilst raising children, she says it's a real struggle.
I'm handing out CVs, no one's coming back to me. I'm with all the employment agencies. I've been to job fairs trying to get to work because I don't want to be in the system. I want to earn my own money for my own kids, take them on holiday, you know, like normal people, but it's really hard. You know, my age as well, and because I haven't worked and haven't got the experience, but I really just want to get back to work.
Hammersmith and Fulham was one of the first parts of London where universal credit was tried for a select group of people, but it's only been fully implemented for all new claimants here since June of last year. Now we've come to meet Daphne, who runs a food bank in the borough, and she says that in that time they've experienced a big increase in demand for their services.
Should be simpler. The reality is that it isn't weight that's the problem. For the last 6 months, the number of people coming to our food bank is double the amount of people that came in the first 6 months of the previous financial year. It takes a good 5 or 6 weeks before you get your first universal credit payment. And for some of our clients, they're waiting 12 or 13 weeks. That's a really long time to wait for any kind of income to come into your bank account. And during that time, of course, during those 6 weeks minimum, people are developing potential rent arrears, debt, they're borrowing money from friends and family, they're struggling to pay the gas, electric and other bills, and that's why this is such an urgent situation.
Now the government point out that it is possible to apply for an advance whilst waiting for a first instalment of universal credit, but that's just a loan and it will need to be paid back from future instalments.
For some, the requirement to pay back an advance payment in instalments has itself resulted in them slipping into debt. Here in Ripon, West Yorkshire, Brendan was able to get an advance payment when he applied for universal credit in June. But it wasn't enough to cover his living expenses and care of his 7-year-old son Tobias, who lives with him 3 days a week.
It probably lasted me about 2 weeks, to be honest, and then, you know, left with nothing. So then you're hoping that what you've got in is enough, which it wasn't. But like I've said to you before, I've got, you know, a good family. They've helped me out a lot. If it weren't for my sisters, you know, I would have been absolutely on my knees. I'd gone without food for about 3 days. And when my sister found out, she came straight over with my other sister, and her husband took me to the shop and they bought me some food and they gave me some money, put some electric in, here's some money. If you're ever like this again, phone us. I won't, because it's embarrassing, you know, but it's like, oh my God, and then you got to look after Tobias to make sure he's all right, and I don't want him to see me upset. So, you know, how do you manage all that? How do you juggle all that? And my brain's about to explode.
Like Anna, Brendan is looking for work, but he has a range of disabilities to contend with.
So I've got the arthritis, my legs, hips, shoulders, hands. I've got epilepsy, got diabetes, and also I'm waiting for bariatric surgery, which will help with the pain in my legs. It'll take that weight off, so I'm waiting for that.
And because of a dispute surrounding whether his 7-year-old son should be registered as living at his address, Brendan has not yet received the housing element of his universal credit. This, combined with the need to repay his advance, means that he has slipped into significant rent arrears and may even face eviction.
I've never struggled like this before in my life. I've never been in this situation where I could lose my home. And it's quite, you know, it's a big thing. I'll die on them streets. If I do get evicted, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know where to go for help. The chances is 50-50 if I'm going to be homeless or not. Where do I go? What do I do? Sell it all, sell everything I've got, things I've had in my family for 50 years. Shall I sell that? And, you know, my uncle left me this in his will. Shall I sell that? My chest set. Can't do it. Well, I just can't do it, and I don't know what to do. If my landlord says, look, you know, okay, we'll leave it at this if you pay the rent, that's fine. That's what I'm hoping for. I daren't think about the alternative. I daren't, because I can't do it. I can't let my son suffer like that. He's a good kid, you know. So I don't know, really. I didn't think that far ahead. All right. Kids shouldn't have to go through. Kids shouldn't have to go through this. No one should, really.
Here in Southampton, Brian also moved on to Universal Credit in June. He took an advance payment, but was still forced to make use of food banks whilst waiting for his first instalment. He doesn't own a computer, and as a result, he finds using the new system, which is internet-based, quite difficult.
I knew it could be 6 to 7 weeks, and that was it. I couldn't do nothing about it. And then somewhere, I can't remember where I heard it, I could get advance payment if I struggled. I didn't know what I was going to get money, so I asked, and they said, well, you can have a small loan, or we can give you, the maximum was half. I eventually got 407, and without food banks I would have struggled, you know.
Several months after his first claim, Brian has also fallen into arrears with his rent, and has only narrowly avoided eviction. He says that he now has just £18 a week to spend on food, and may need to make use of food banks again. In Westminster, senior Labour backbencher Frank Field has been leading calls for a pause in the rollout. He says that the new system has changed the very nature of the welfare state.
Up to universal credit, the whole aim of welfare state was to prevent people falling into destitution. We've now got a benefit which at least for 6 weeks, maybe for 10, maybe for 12, maybe for more, pays very little benefit, if any benefit at all. And what we're seeing is people both increase numbers who are hungry, increase in the numbers who can't pay their rent or don't pay, the increase in the numbers who are without fuel or light in their houses, and doing everything possible to prevent eviction. If you're at that point where you're fighting madly to keep your home, a roof over your head, even though you're hungry, even though you've got debts running up, even though you can't pay your rent, even though you've been cut off from the sources of power, that's what I mean by destitution, and those numbers are rising.
But ministers insist that for most people, universal credit is working, and that it has big advantages over the previous system.
To understand why the government's been quite so determined to press ahead with universal credit, we've come to the place where it was born, the Centre for Social Justice. It's a think tank that was responsible for the original design of the policy.
Let's be under no illusions. This new system, as it stands, is so much better than the old system. Let's not pretend people weren't falling into rent arrears under the old system or getting stuck out of work in welfare dependency under it. If you look at every study done by everyone from the IFS to the government, universal credit on the whole will lead to more people being in work, those people earning more money, and those people more likely to stay in work, because the way the system is designed is to support people in work, not just get them into work and leave them. And that is the big transformation that universal credit will bring about. What we've seen under the old benefit system and the new ones rolling out, there are always some that are falling through the cracks, and it is absolutely imperative the government does all it can to stop that. One thing that we think the government should look very, very closely at to reduce the chance of that happening is actually making the system slightly more generous than it is. When Centre for Social Justice designed this system back in 2009, it was slightly more generous in terms of the amount of money that people would be given.
So clearly we're seeing some teething problems, some implementation problems, and also you say that the government should consider making the whole system more generous. But the 6 week wait, the at least sort of nominal 6 week wait, is built into the design of the system because universal credit is paid in arrears. Doesn't that just fundamentally misunderstand how people on the lowest incomes live, because they can't afford to wait for a whole month without any income at all?
The majority of people in work are paid in arrears at the end of the month, and so actually it completely makes sense to make sure that the welfare system mirrors what life will be like when somebody is in work. Now, there are going to be some people, as you've rightly said, for whom that won't work, for whom they need their money sooner. They haven't got the savings to wait for 6 weeks. For us, the most important part of this is the fact that you can now get a benefit advance, which is basically half of your first payment up front within 5 working days, or even on the day that you come in if you really, really need it.
But of course, in some ways, that's not really a solution, is it? Because people then have to pay back that money from subsequent payments, so they still face the risk of rent arrears and all the rest.
They do have to pay it back. I think it's worth bearing in mind, people have 6 months to pay it back, and all the money that they get up front, there's absolutely no interest paid on that whatsoever. So it's a fairly fair system that I think is set up.
The government did make one concession yesterday by agreeing to make the helpline used by universal credit claimants free of charge. But despite rumours about a reduction in the waiting time for payments, the government say they have no broader plans to change course.
As a result, critics of the policy will no doubt continue to say that for people like Brendan, Anna and Brian, that will likely spell more hardship as winter approaches.
I'll read you a statement from the DWP in a moment. Let me read you some messages. Michael says it's distressing, so distressing to hear a child in Britain is searching inside bins for food. Susan says, I've never been on benefits, I've always worked. I think the way universal credit is being rolled out is appalling. These are some of the most vulnerable people in society, and how can they be expected to live for at least 6 weeks without the first payment is beyond belief. These people don't have huge savings to rely on and are being forced into more debt. Brendan, just heard your email from the guy who said there's no poverty in our country. He's wrong. He needs to wake up. Faria says it's absolutely shocking. People think that poverty does not exist in this country. Malcolm says your contributor who said that there is no poverty in Britain is absolutely right. I've worked in the Middle East, the Far East and Africa. Most of my working life, I saw what real poverty was. The vast majority of people here have proper shelter and somewhere to live. But in some third world countries, there are people living in cardboard boxes. Everybody here is entitled to a decent medical service from the NHS. Not many other countries have anything like that. The pampered and spoiled people of this country should be grateful for what they have. The Department for Work and Pensions told us no one who needs support should have to wait 6 weeks. When people apply for universal credit, they're advised about the maximum advance they can receive and that they can repay that over 6 months. In exceptional circumstances, this can be deferred for up to 3 months. And for claimants moving from a legacy benefit onto universal credit, they can repay over 12 months. The DWP go on to say once we know someone needs an advance, they can get it within 5 days or on the same day if they are in urgent need. Right, still to come on the programme. 2 years after the collapse of Kids Company, the charity's former boss tells us she has nothing to be sorry for. That's after 10, and Sir Tom Jones reveals that